Have you been feeling like your entire life is falling apart? You're not crazy. You're just waking up. And I know because I've been there, because there was a time in my life when nothing made sense anymore. The job, the people I used to hang out with, my goals, the things I cared about, it just all started to feel empty. I'd wake up with a feeling of anxious for no reason. I started to become so sensitive to energy, to people, to crowds, to music, and social media just felt overwhelming. I started to notice the vibe of everything. I couldn't no longer stand small talk or being on the surface. Starting to notice the synchronicities of, 111 and different events. The weird part was I couldn't explain it to anyone. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me, but deep down, I felt like there was something bigger that was happening with me. And I started questioning everything, the reality that I was living and why we were here. And that was the start of my spiritual awakening. And why I'm making this video is because once I understood the stages, it changed everything for me. I stopped having to fight this process. I started trusting, and my entire life started to shift. So if you're in this right now, if you're feeling lost or numb or just not like yourself, this video is going to help you decode what's happening on the inside, the best thing you can do that can assist you in your awakening. So for a lot of people, the spiritual awakening doesn't come through meditation or reading a book. It comes through breakdown. It's through a moment that shatters everything. For someone, it could be losing someone they love, or it could be a diagnosis, a betrayal, a car accident. Whatever it is, it's a rock bottom moment that you didn't see coming. It's a pain that cracks you wide open to the illusion. And even though it hurts like hell, the ego does not like it, but it's often the very thing that wakes up the soul. Because when that external world starts to fall apart, we have no other choice but to turn inward. And this is what happened to me when I got a divorce. My whole world fell apart because I had been a mother in the role of mother and parent full time by myself, and I didn't realize. And this happened to me when I got a divorce. Part of my awakening, it awakens in layers, right? And part of this awakening was I was in the role of mother, wife, and I didn't know anything else until my world cracked apart. I could no longer tolerate who I had become. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I had to go on a soul search to find who I was again. And that's when the soul starts to speak. So if you're going through something like that right now, it's not a punishment, it's a portal. It's a sacred initiation into who you really are. And to this awakening, it doesn't happen. It will happen over time. More and more of the veil lifts and you start to see reality for more of what it is versus what we've been told, the programs we've been living and the things that we've been feeling and experiencing start to break down. So let's get into the 12 stages of the spiritual awakening. We're going to go over this so you can finally understand why you're feeling this way, what's really happening beyond the surface, and how to move through this with clarity, peace, power, and alignment. Stage 1 is about discontent, and you feel this void and it starts to grow bigger and bigger, like something's missing in your life. Yeah, everything looks good on the paper, but not that depression, that feeling of something's off. That's your soul whispering, hey, there's something more. That's the first crack in the illusion. And then stage 2, starting to question everything, because now you're asking the bigger questions. Why am I here? What is the truth? And you start binging on books, YouTube videos, podcasts, and this is the part where your soul starts remembering why you came here, what you're actually here for, because the matrix starts crumbling, which is all that programming that you believe to be real. It starts to fall apart. And that moves us to stage 3, which is the awakening. And that's when something cracks wide open. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a breakup. Maybe it's that you're starting to feel differently. There's something bigger for you. And that's where that illusion starts to fall away. And you start to see maybe there's something more to this. Stage 4, resistance and your shadow starting to surface. So here's where it gets really messy. Your ego starts freaking out. You have the fear coming up, the triggers, the old trauma, and you start meeting with that shadow side of yourself. See, light exists with dark, and without dark, there is no light. So the more you go down deep into the darkness, the more light you can access. But it's part of the shedding process that we have to move through. It's uncomfortable, but it's through the addictions and the dark side of ourselves, the unexpressed sides of ourselves. And how I like to think of it is there's parts of me that are good and there's parts of me that are bad. There's parts of me that are healed. There's parts of me that have trauma. There's parts of me that are beautiful. There's parts of me that are ugly, but they're all me. And as we start to accept that part of us, which is the shadow, and there's no resistance towards that shadow, we can come to a level of integration. And a lot of times I see with the readings that I'm doing is that we're living in the dark shadows of our parents, and the things that we didn't like about them, darker sides of them, start to be oppressed by ourselves, and we don't even notice that they're happening until we start to become more aware. And as we become more aware of that, we can transmute it. We can be with that, be present with it, and transmute it. Stage 5, the dark night of the soul. And this is the void where you feel lost, alone. Nothing makes sense anymore, and you aren't relating to people the way that you used to. This isn't destruction, it's a rebirth process, right? So we've got the death and the rebirth cycle. And as a Scorpio, I'm constantly going through the death and rebirth cycle, which is, this is working. Okay, now let's kill it so we can die and rebirth. And like Rumi said, the wound is where the light enters. And this is when the new you can begin. So the faster that you can let that things of that old identity, the shadows, just die so you can rebirth, that's the stage 6, the rebirth. You start to show up differently. Now you're emerging, but you're different. You're not pretending anymore. You say no to things that don't resonate. You're not people pleasing anymore because you can't. You've lost your capacity. You're tired. You're exhausted. You're moving towards the truth. And this is what Carl Jung said as the individuation, becoming your authentic self. See, a lot of times in childhood, we didn't go through the individuation process where we start to become our own being and with our own thoughts. We have to start to go through that individuation process so we can be more authentic and fully expressed into who we are. And that's where I feel like the objective of why we're here is when we can get to that fullest expression of who we are in our authentic sense, because that is going to be the highest resonant frequency. They did a test and they measured what was the highest vibrational frequency, and they thought it was going to be love, but what they found was it was actually authenticity. So that's the highest vibrational frequency. So if you're in your authentic self, no longer programmed and controlled by the matrix, but thinking on your own, sovereign within your energy, then you're at the highest vibrational frequency. And I want to say that we're going in and out of that. I'm not always there. I want to focus in my objective to be there, but there are times when I've sacrificed myself to please or make something right for someone else. And it's always coming back to myself and trying to be as authentic as possible. Stage 7, this is oneness and unity, and you start to feel connected with everything. The people, the trees, the animals, the stars. You realize you're not separate. You're part of the same field. And that's what happens as the ego starts to dissolve, what unity consciousness feels like. And I'm not always there. I've had glimpses of it. The trees talking to me, or the land, or flowers, or talking to me, where I'm connected to everything. But this doesn't always last as I'm interacting with the matrix and going back to my regular life and then going back into a state of gratitude and connection to everything. Stage 8, synchronicity and flow. And this is now where it starts to get fun. You start to see the angel numbers repeating, synchronicities everywhere, connections. The universe is speaking back to you. You're in the flow. You're not chasing anymore. You're in alignment. And how this works, this took me forever to figure out, but I see us as an instrument. And when we're tuned, we're at a higher vibrational frequency. Like attracts like. And that's a law. It's the law of vibration. In the 3D world, which we live in, there is a law of gravity. That's a law, which means if I'm going to jump off the top of my house, I'm not going to be saved, right? I'm going to fall, right? And there's no way around that law. But in the other dimensions, there's the law of vibration. And that is a law, which means when you're at a high vibration, tuned into a high frequency, you're going to attract more of that. So you're not going to have to chase things. You are just can align your thoughts, your emotions, and your feelings, and you connect in to that vibration, and things just start showing up. It becomes effortless. When we're out of alignment, there's a lot of effort that we have to put in. When we are in the synchronicity and the flow, things become effortless, and you're not having to force things to happen. If you're having to force things to happen, you're out of alignment in a vibrational state. Stage 9, authentic expression. this is when your voice starts to change. Your energy changes. You're no longer hiding who you are. And honestly, you don't care what anybody else thinks anymore because you're tuned into a higher vibration, a higher frequency, and your truth starts to become your superpower. Now, this takes a lot to get to this, but if you're not there, this is the step that's coming, and just allowing that. Stage 10, elevated consciousness. You start receiving downloads, vivid dreams, subtle energy you start feeling. You start tapping into something beyond the mind. And it's not about escaping the world, it's about being anchored into your truth. In 2020, I started to download information when people were standing in front of me, or see spirits and start seeing this. It just started happening for me, receiving downloads of information that I didn't actually know. It was a precognitive. I wouldn't understand what was going to happen, but it was coming to me, and then I would understand the information later. But as you start to get to this higher vibrational frequency, as you start to become more authentic and tuned in, you will be tapped into source directly. You can call it God, you can call it the field, whatever you want to call it. It's something that's directing you, that you're receiving the information. Stage 11 is about co-creation. You realize you're not a victim. You become a co-creator, and life is responding to your thoughts, to your frequencies, to your alignment. You're no longer reacting, you're intentionally creating. Now, this is something that is a process that you can understand as you go deeper and deeper into it. It's not something that I feel like happens effortlessly. There's a lot of effort that goes into having that, but it's through awareness that you can start to understand that on another level. Stage 12, unconditional love and full integration. You start accepting all your flaws, your past. You see everything as sacred. You love without needing a reason, because you realize there's nothing wrong with you. You just forgot who you were. And how I see my understanding of, studying spirituality for over 25 years, I've understood that I see Jesus Christ as an ascended master who was from another time, possibly a time traveler, who understood these concepts that love was the ultimate. And if we understand that, as Jesus said, we could be like him or better, then if we know that the path to the highest vibration for us is love, if that's the end goal, because he showed us that it was, then why don't we live in the end, right? And so how I've tried to recreate that in my life is like, okay, I react, I freak out, I am not my best self, and I come back to that message to say, well, what would love do in this moment? And remind myself and continue to hold that awareness, because without awareness, we're not shifting anything. I realized I was not in my best version of myself in that moment. Okay, cancel. And who do I want to become right now? And remembering and putting love first, because that is always going to put me in alignment with where I need to be. I want you to know on this journey, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're waking up. The path is not pretty. It's actually a lot of destruction that happens before you get into alignment. A lot of things that have to break down. And that's one of the things that people don't tell you and don't show you. You see the aftermath of who they become, but it's from a lot of shedding of their identity. One time I was at the seminar, and the person, had gotten to a high level of, it was like the 2 Comma Club, they had gotten to a high level financially, and they were speaking on stage to assist others, to tell them how to do it themselves. And they said, you know what? There was like 1,000 versions of me that had to die to stand up on this stage today. So many layers of me that I had to shed. And that's exactly how I feel, is that there's so many layers of me that I've had to shed in order to become this right now. And it's possible for you. If you're suffering right now, if you feel alone, I promise that if you start speaking with your soul, listening to your soul, hearing from another place other than the mind, that you're going to move into alignment. And it might look like breakdown, because the choices that you made, and the things that you've chosen, and the people and the places and things are in the old identity, and we have to bridge into that new identity. So let's normalize this awakening. Let's own it. Let's evolve together. Thanks for listening.